Hey everyone. So today we're going to talk about listening. We'll kind of go through the major concepts. We'll talk about different skills, strategies, needs analysis, materials and technology, developing autonomy, and assessment for this. So let's get into it. So some things to think about for listening is that listening skills are fundamentally unobservable. You can't really tell by looking at someone if they understand what they're listening to, and there's very little way to measure it other than by using some other skills, either productive skills or something else to show somebody's listening. Another thing about listening to keep in mind, remember your crash and we want comprehensible input, and you want it to aim for a little bit harder than what the learner's present ability is. When we talk about listening, there are a couple different ways we can divide up different types of listening. One is interactional versus transactional listening tasks. So interactional listening is done in a social context with an expectation the listener will respond in some way. And transactional listening is more of a one-way listening, just for information, usually from a non-interactive source, so maybe from the radio or from a lecturer or a tour guide or something like that. So we have top-down versus bottom-up ideas in listening. So top-down processing is understanding the general idea and purpose of input and using that as a framework to get the details and understand the details. Bottom-up processing is understanding the input at the most granular level and building meaning from there. So picking that up from the sounds, the words, that kind of thing. We need both to effectively listen, and we're going to need both as we work on listening in the classroom. Another concept to think about is that we do listen for acquisition. So most listening tasks and even courses are focused on comprehension, and after comprehension they move on toward acquisition. So if you think about the way that a child learns their L1, they learn a lot of it through listening, and they learn words, they learn sounds, they learn constructions, and internalize that and use it to understand bigger and bigger chunks of language. As they learn, they notice they start to use some of those words, some of those constructions, and in their own situations, and situations that are new for them. So that's something to think about when you're teaching listening, is that not only are we listening for comprehension, but we're also listening to get a better understanding of what language options there are and how to use them effectively. Also, when we think about listening, we kind of want to think about the different types of spoken language that are out there. So when you're listening, you might be listening to a monologue or listening to a dialogue or participating in a dialogue. And there are planned, unplanned monologues, or formal and informal monologues. As far as dialogues go, some are transactional, some are interactional, and they might be in familiar or unfamiliar situations. So I've put together a list of examples here. These are all potential sources of listening materials that you could go out and find and use in the classroom, depending on the needs of your students and depending on the goals of the type of instruction you're doing. And I think I've definitely used recordings of all of these different situations, and some of them are appropriate for, or all of them are appropriate for certain classroom situations and populations. All right. Now, I talked about micro skills and macro skills in the first lecture. Now you can see them in action. I won't read these to you because there are a lot of them. But it's a good document to just come back to and think about the different fine-grained micro skills that you might want to work on, and the different kind of macro skills you might want to work on. So you notice here in the micro skills you have some that maybe you'd never thought about, like things like recognizing cohesive devices or reduced forms of words. And in the macro skills, using body language and other nonverbal cues to decipher meaning can be a skill set, or kind of a skill that you don't always consider when you're teaching, but it's a useful one. So as far as types of tasks go, there are a few different general types of tasks. So we have intensive tasks where we're really listening for details and focusing on bottom-up processing. Listening for phonemes, listening for words, intonation, transitions, maybe listening for numbers or names is a common type of task. Also do responsive listening where the task is to understand the question and then respond appropriately to it. So questions also with commands or clarifications, checking for comprehension. There's selective listening where we're scanning a material, kind of scanning through listening for details or information or general ideas. So it could be bigger than intensive, more complex than intensive listening, but we're still looking through the information, looking through the text for different points. There's extensive listening where you're engaging with longer, more complex material and focused on a top-down understanding. These might be listening to a lecture or a discussion or a story, and you might be testing comprehension or responses, purpose, maybe a review of it as well. And then there's interactive listening, which is direct linguistic interaction with another speaker. So this is where we're looking at conversation or discussion, also role play and debates. Those kinds of listening tasks are considered interactive. We'll talk a little bit about when we're teaching listening strategies. It's really useful to do what's called a think aloud. So think aloud is when you are walking through a certain task and you, as an instructor, are trying to demonstrate the thought processes that go towards successful listening. So you'd want to take a simple task, look over the questions that are coming afterwards, and then make some predictions about what you're going to be hearing, what kind of topic they're going to be talking about, maybe what vocabulary might come up, that kind of thing. Listen to it with the entire class. In the process, make authentic but maybe exaggerated gestures and reactions as you listen. So make a show of listening and being confused and being surprised and being happy to hear something that you recognize and expect. You might also pause it at times to talk about your thoughts as you're listening. So what's easy here? What's hard here? And then at the end, you'll also want to talk through your experience. How did it go? Did you hear what you needed to hear? What did you hear that you expected? What was unexpected? Go back and do it a couple times, just so that students can kind of understand what the process is going to be like. Especially with listening, it can be a little difficult to know what successful listening is going to look like. Listening is usually so natural that walking through the strategies for effective listening explicitly is going to be helpful. We think about needs analysis. We're going to want to be thinking about our population, their needs, wants, and lacks, the skills they'll be working with, and authentic materials to get you there. And I'm going to walk through an example here with, let's say, Thai high school students that are looking forward to doing exams, going into higher education or professional work, and then also customer service work, possibly in English and in Thai. So if we think about this population, they're going to need both conversational listening, they'll need lecture listening if they're going into higher education, and they'll need a lot of transactional experience. They'll need to be able to listen and get information from people. And one of the big things they'll be lacking is access to native speakers. If they're living in Thailand, they're far away from large groups of authentic native speaker speech. So that's something you want to keep in mind. Um, so you're probably going to be relying a lot on technology and recordings, that kind of thing. The skills they're going to really need to be able to recognize communication purpose and meaning in what they're listening to. They'll need a sense of discourse structure for listening to different types of speech, especially when you talk about higher education. You have lectures. In professional work, you have training or you have presentations. And with customer service work, customer service conversations tend to be very structured as well. Processing common grammatical constructions in real time will be important, and comfort with a variety of dialects will also be important. So with that in mind, we want to be selecting authentic materials, video lectures for the higher education focus, maybe training materials, training videos or training audio materials, and then recordings of authentic conversations in the different types of arenas that they'd be going into. So it's kind of a walkthrough of needs analysis for that kind of group. Next we'll talk about some issues with building autonomy. How can you teach learners to improve listening skills on their own? So we have technological tools. There are lots and lots of audio tools, audio and video tools to self-paced listening. So you can take a recording, either video or audio, and slow it down, pause it, chop it up. You can do lots of stuff like that. There are also you can also use native speaker resources. So setting up some kind of practice so that your learners can talk to actual service professionals. This might be customer service employees or people at an information desk at your institution, maybe docents in a museum. There are lots of people out there that are paid to be polite and helpful to people. We also talk about building autonomy. We're talking about different kinds of metacognitive strategies too. So kind of like what I talked about with the Think Aloud. We need to prepare, learners need to prepare themselves before the task. They need to monitor themselves during the task. And then after the task, they need to reflect and plan on how to continue working on their skills and on the task at hand. We talk about technology for developing listening autonomy. YouTube is actually getting tons and tons of features. There are lots and lots of features available on YouTube. YouTube will do transcripts, will do subtitles. You can slow down a YouTube video or speed up a YouTube video. Yeah, there's a lot you can do with YouTube, and you can find any kind of video on any kind of topic at really any kind of level if you have some patience. There are also browser extensions you can plug into your, you can add to Firefox or Chrome or probably Microsoft's Edge that will read websites to you. These are mostly made for people with visual impairments, but they're also useful for people who want to hear more English. I really like Breaking News English as a site. They have lots of graded articles with materials, so they have news articles that are at different levels, and they have recordings of native speakers reading them. ESLvideo.com lets you take a YouTube video and actually make a little quiz to go with it. And one of my favorite sources of listening is podcasts. So they're free. They're on lots and lots of topics. Some are specific to English learners. Most are on just different topics, news, culture, whatever. And most podcast players offer playback adjustments, so you can slow things down, you can stop things, you can pause and go back pretty easily with these tools. So offering or guiding learners to these tools and then training them to use them effectively is really valuable. Next, we'll talk a little bit about assessing listening. And you want to think a little bit about your goals for your assessment. Are you trying to place somebody in a level, test their general proficiency, or are you doing your assessment just to get feedback on their skills? With listening, you will likely have to integrate with other skills, so you'll need to combine listening assessment with maybe a writing component or a speaking component to get a full picture of how their listening is going. And you want to think about the different types of tasks that the learners will be engaged in. So here's an incomplete chart here. I would want you to look at the examples here and then think about what examples could go in the blanks. So if we think about a placement test, looking for responsive listening skills, that might take the form of an interview where learners would have to answer questions about themselves and in the process listen to and understand those questions effectively. For a feedback type of assessment that is using an extensive task, an example would be to listen to or watch a lecture and come to class with discussion questions for it, so that they need to understand the big picture of that lecture and be able to respond to it and discuss it effectively. You can look through the other examples, and I would encourage you to think about what you could put in the blanks here, and think about the different types of assessments that might be out there for each skill, or for each type of assessment and for each type of task. All right, so just to wrap up here, remember with listening is often underserved, and it's usually assumed to be a natural acquisition process. It's often not taught very explicitly. So giving learners strategies and not just listening practice and listening tasks that kind of feel like assessments will lead to better outcomes. And preparing your learners to be effective listeners is going to be a great part of your listening instruction in the future. All right, that's listening. Please let me know if you have questions, and I look forward to hearing what you have to say and do for the assignment and for the discussion board this week. See you later. Bye.